Hello, I have a very interesting story for you today. It's called Don Demonio and Tia Pia, or Tia Pia and Don Demonio. This story I heard a couple of months ago. Actually, not here. It was in a book of Spanish folk tales. And this is set near the city of Granada. So you'll see references of the city in this story. And for those of you who visited it or are planning to, I hope you get a taste of a folktale from that region. So long, long time ago, there lived in a town near Granada called La Zubia an old widowed woman who had just one daughter. Her name was Tia Pia, and Tia Pia was old and her skin was dry, and she was very active. She would get up at sunup and go to keep working until sundown. And not only was she very active, she had one of the sharpest tongues in town. In fact, her tongue was sharper than a butcher's knife on market day. But Tia Pia's daughter was the opposite. She would just sit in a corner next to the balcony and just watch passersby in order to see if somebody would be interested in proposing to her for marriage. And that's all she did. She would dress herself in red clothes, and then she would sit with her arms folded as if there was no work for her. And even an earthquake couldn't move her. Well, Tia Pia would see this every day, and she would even get her tongue would be even sharper than usual. One day, Tia Pia had asked for her daughter's help in picking up a boiling pot of lye. But unfortunately, her daughter was still stuck in her dream world and wasn't paying attention, and she lost grip of that hot liquid. And some of it fell on Tia Pia's foot. And Tia Pia was so upset. She screamed and shouted and yelled and said, "You useless girl, back in the day when I was younger, I used to help my family, and look at you, all you do is wait all day for a sweetheart to come your way and sweep you off your feet." Well, the girl was embarrassed, but there's nothing she could do. And then Tia Pia added to her surprise that, "You know what? You know how useless you are? You might as well marry the devil." A few days after that, there was a new man in town, and he was called Don Demonio. Now, Don Demonio hit it off really well with the younger people. He knew a few tricks, he knew a lot about the world because he had traveled to so many places. But the older people, they had doubts about Don Demonio. They weren't sure if this was a good person. In fact, some of them had noticed, like the old uncles, that he wouldn't go to the church, and if he saw a religious leader, he would change his pace and go somewhere else. He would walk somewhere else. So they weren't happy with Don Demonio. But um, it so happened that Tia Pia's daughter was interested in Don Demonio, and he wasn't at all intimidated by Tia Pia, unlike all her other suitors. In fact, he was really polite with Tia Pia no matter how much she dissuaded him from marrying her daughter. And sooner or later, he proposed. And when it was time for the wedding, Tia Pia had doubts about Don Demonio, but she couldn't be sure. But she said to her daughter, "You know what? When you get to your new home, I want you to do something. And this is a custom that we've always had. I want you to take this blessed branch of olive. And when you're alone with your husband, strike him with it. But make sure before you do that, close off everything. The chimney should be closed, the windows should be closed, everything should be closed." Now, it so happened that Don Demonio and Tia Pia's daughter were on their way to a house near the city of Granada. And when she got there, she did exactly what her mother had told her. And when Don Demonio saw the sight of that olive branch, he freaked out. In fact, the cap that he was wearing came off to reveal horns. So Tia Pia had been Right, there was something off about Don Demonio, and he took on the form, his true form. He tried to escape from any place he could, but he couldn't find any place to escape from that house except a keyhole. Now, unknown to Tia Pia's daughter, Tia Pia had followed them, and in her hand was a glass bottle, an empty glass bottle. And as soon as Don Demonio changed his shape into a small insect with a tail and horns and tried to go through that keyhole, Tia Pia was waiting on the other side of the keyhole with that glass bottle. And she captured Don Demonio and she corked him up so he couldn't escape. And she said, "Aha, I knew it. I knew something was wrong." Tia Pia's daughter was so disappointed. She was inconsolable. She was crying and laughing at the same time because she was relieved that she had been saved. But she still felt so bad that she didn't have a husband anymore. The next day, Tia Pia took that glass bottle and she decided to go to the Sierra Nevada mountain range. And there, on the tallest peak called Mulhacen, she decided to bury that little bottle of glass with Don Demonio in it into the snow. There was snow, whether it was summer or winter, there was always snow there. And then she buried it deep into the snow and came back. And many years later, Tia Pia's daughter found herself a husband and she moved to Cordoba. But for 10 years, would you believe, there was no conflict in La Zubia and Granada and all those areas. In fact, the husbands appreciated their wives and vice versa. And parents were happy with their children who were obedient. In fact, the only people suffering were lawyers because there was no conflict. And this happened for 10 years. But after 10 years, there was a man, a soldier who was coming back from a war, and he was on his way to the Sierra Nevada mountain range, but he stopped in La Zubia. And he came across Tia Pia, and they had a conversation, and he was a good match to Tia Pia's humor and sarcasm, and they talked about the place that Tia Pia was from and how the city has been at peace in so many ways. And the next day he went off and took his horse to the top of the mountain, the Sierra Nevada mountain range, where the highest peak was Mulhacen. And there he, wanted to bury his feet deep into the snow. And one of his feet touched something. And when he looked, it was a glass bottle. And inside it was a curious looking insect. But was it really an insect? But before he could even guess, this creature, or Don Demonio, was banging against that little tiny glass bottle and saying, "If you let me go, I can help you. I'm Don Demonio. And for the last 10 years, my mother-in-law has locked me up in this little glass bottle and no one could find me and I couldn't escape. Please help me." And Ricardo, the soldier, was wondering, oh, is it the woman I just met? Is he talking about her? And why would she lock you up? So he asked him, why were you locked up all these years? And then Don Demonio explained how he had been outwitted by his mother-in-law, who had found out who he was, who he truly was, and had come up with a plan to capture him in a glass jar. And Ricardo laughed and laughed and laughed. Oh, she outed you, the devil. Anyway, a few moments later, Don Demonio proposed, like, look, if you let me go, now you know that my story is true. I want you to know that I can do something for you. So why don't we exchange services? You let me out of this bottle and I'll do something for you. What is your heart's greatest desire? Maybe I can make it come true for you. And Ricardo said, no, 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 nobody can help me with my heart's greatest desire because I actually desire a princess. And that princess, wouldn't marry a commoner like me. It's impossible. And Don Demonio said, anything is possible. We can come up with a plan. You can have the princess. In fact, why don't I cast a spell on the princess? And the only person who can who can come up with a solution for that would be you, and that way you will gain the princess. He, the king will have no choice but to give her hand in marriage to you. Ricardo thought about it for a while and he decided, you know what? Maybe it's not a bad idea. So what he did was he did let go of Don Demonio and they went to where the princess was. And soon after that, the princess had fallen ill. A spell was cast, and many healers and doctors had been arranged by the king to cure his daughter, but unfortunately, nothing worked. And then Ricardo came and said, I can heal the princess. What will I get in return? And the king said, well, you can have her hand in marriage, but if you're not able to cure her, you will lose your head. So you choose. Ricardo decided to take a risk. He knew the odds were really high, but he knew that, he had helped Don Demonio and he should be able to get the princess. So the king said, you have a few hours and I will leave you in the princess's room. And if she's not cured by whatever you have to offer, then I will punish you. So Ricardo was there with Don Demonio and the hours were coming to an end. And Ricardo said, please, remove the spell so I can have my princess. And the princess looked like she was on her deathbed. She was whiter than white. And she was breathing heavily as if like she was close to dying. And Ricardo was looking at, it's almost sunset. And Don Demonio said, ha, 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 I don't have to do anything for you. I'm already free. What will you do for me? I don't have to do anything for you. Well, Ricardo thought of a plan. He knew how much Don Demonio hated Tia Pia and how scared he was of Tia Pia. So he told people who were outside the window of the room of the princess that I want you to ring all the church bells. I want you to ring them all at once. And they did that. And when Don Demonio noticed all those church bells ringing, he asked, what's going on? Why are they ringing all the church bells? Well, Ricardo said, it's because you know who? There's a special guest that's coming this way to this city. And in order to honor her, the church bells are being rung. And Don Demonio said, who is this special person who's coming? Ah, her name is Tia Pia. Do you know her? She's coming. As soon as Don Demonio heard that, he sprang into action, left, and was never seen again. And because he was gone, the spell was gone. And slowly but surely, the princess opened her eyes, the color came back to her cheeks, and she actually liked Ricardo. So she accepted his proposal to marry her, and they lived happily after. As for Tia Pia, we don't know if she knew that she had helped Ricardo get the princess, but till the end of her days, she would chuckle to herself, thinking how she had outsmarted the devil himself.